And here we are. I'm Vito. Lucas is here with me. This is episode number 2 of the Light Brigade podcast. How you doing, Lucas?
Pretty good, yeah. How are you? Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. This is our holiday episode, is it not?
I think so. Yeah, and so we've chosen a rarely talked about, little known, obscure Christmas book in A Christmas Carol,
Well, the
and
Christmas Carol. But
the Christmas Carol.
it's actually quite I think it's quite an involved book. I think it's because we're so familiar with it, we very often think it's simple. I don't think it's that simple,
Mm.
and I think that's what we want to talk about. And by the way, love the ugly, as you call it, a jumper. Cheers.
Thank you very much. I don't think it was ugly though.
You got polar bears. I see some monkeys on there.
You said you liked it before we started recording. Now
I
you're ambushing me with it being ugly. Yeah, polar bears
no.
in various Christmas hats and
Is
antlers
that a
and stuff.
polar bear in the middle? It looks like kind of like a monkey and a polar bear, which is kind of
That's a good
weird.
point. Well, he's wearing sunglasses, so that's probably what's
Oh,
throwing
that
you
is
off.
a polar bear. Okay, it's all polar bears.
They're all polar bears.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm wearing a hat because it's extremely cold, and also I didn't buzz my head before the thing, and I didn't want to go on
Oh, yeah.
camera looking all my hair all fucking weird.
But you know what though, your heating prices are like a quarter of ours. I say stick the heating on, treat yourself.
Oh yeah, no, I have a space heater like right under my chair,
Good.
because the sliding door is just not properly insulated in the back room here. So,
I get you.
but
Okay.
we do what we can.
So
So,
we're pairing A Christmas Carol somewhat dubiously with
right, we've got A Christmas Carol
hmm,
with George Orwell's The Road to Wigan Pier. Now, I believe The Christmas Carol is well known. Road to Wigan Pier probably much less well known, but
hmm.
it shares some common themes, and it is a bit of a dubious pairing. But it's only
Sure.
tenuously joined by the fact that there are poor people in both of it.
Hmm.
Sort of the question: how should we relate to the poor? What should we do? What are we obligated to do? So I don't know if you want to give the short rundown. It's the Christmas Carol is such a familiar story, but I think it may be worth going over. So if you want to take the
Yeah, of course. So the Christmas Carol is a very familiar story, so I probably won't go into much depth. But you have in Ebenezer Scrooge a is he like an accountant? Is he a sort of he's a businessman of sorts, of a well
I think
respected one?
he runs a business. He has a counting house, but I believe he's a
Hmm.
like it looks like he trades goods. He has warehouses, and I know he buys assets and sells them. So he has corn, for instance. I believe in one of the
Oh
things that
yeah.
people are trying to. There's some other businessmen are trying to buy corn from him, and they want to give it to poor people.
Hmm.
And he says, "Well, you didn't make the decision yesterday. Now the price has gone up, and if you don't make the
Hmm.
deal today, the
Oh,
price
interesting.
is going to go up again." So he's really
Hmm.
squeezing. They're saying, "Come on, he's like,
Yeah.
I'm just. This is the rules of business. I'm doing the
Yeah.
right thing."
And he's in 19th century London, very much Dickens's time.
I think it's the 1840s at some. I think it's that
Yeah.
decade.
Well, I think it was written then, right? And it's set
Yeah,
when
I
it was
think it's
written, I realized.
it's right.
Um, he has an employee, Bob Cratchit, who we know has a family, and it opens in the lead up to Christmas. We learn pretty soon that Ebenezer Scrooge is not a massive fan of Christmas, and
Right.
he's known everywhere as we would say in England, a bit tight, a bit, the purse strings are a bit tight. I think probably where that phrase comes from.
Cheap.
He had a business partner, Jacob Marley, who passed away a little while ago. And we know that he lives in his house, which is beautifully described as a kind of house that's like playing hide and seek and then
Hmm.
forgot to come out and say, here I am. So you can imagine it down one of those like London alleys. We don't find out exactly where he lives, I don't think, but it's the city of London, I think, which maybe our American listeners, the millions of them, won't know. Isn't London the city, but the city of London is the square mile in London, which is a financial district and kind of a law upon itself in many ways, unto itself.
Oh, he
Um,
lives he lives near the exchange. Because he's
exactly.
shown walking from his office to the exchange, and walking back to his house directly from there. So he lives within the financial
Well, not
district,
directly
right?
from there because he does stop to have what we're led to believe is quite a sad meal in
Right,
a tavern, right? Where I guess presumably it was normal to eat in such places rather than at home. He goes to his home, this house that used to be Jacob Marley's, and I think the first sign that things are going to be quite different this evening is that the door knocker, which you imagine is one of these ornate Victorian heavy iron door knockers, seems to morph into Jacob Marley's face just before he goes to knock it.
right.
But Scrooge is very much a man of rationality and science and whatnot, and he kind of dismisses that quite early on because he's so tight. The lights aren't on in his house. You think he just gets like one candle, doesn't he? And he goes up and he's very keeps the stove, the brazier, whatever they call it, quite low, even though
Right.
it's freezing. He's got you imagine him with the old sleeping hat that you see in all the
Yeah.
depictions, right?
You know, I
Um,
thought of this. I thought of this honestly. If I could interject, I saw a funny meme where I guess it was from Britain, but the husband walks in and says to the wife, "I'm going down the pub. Better put on your coat." And she says, "Why? Am I going to?" He says, "No, I'm turning the heat off." It's that sort of thing.
Lovely.
But yeah.
Um,
But that's the way he lives. That's the way he treats himself. I think that's
hmm,
part of the whole thing. But we can get to that later. But yeah, please continue.
yep. And then the ghost of Jacob Marley visits him, his old business partner who has passed
Right.
away, and it's hideous, right? He's got chains that he's dragging around. I think his like jaw is kind of detached from his face. He's in some kind of
Yeah.
purgatory, which means he's kind of wandering around London, seeing all the people he could have helped with all his
Right.
money, but didn't. And
He
he
has to
tells
be
Scrooge,
purged, right? He didn't do what he should have done in his life, and now he has to. He has to be. He's not in hell, but he's not in heaven. He is suffering. It's kind of like the
and
ghost of
he's
Hamlet's father, right? It's kind of the same
yes,
type of idea.
and he's come to tell Scrooge, you still got time, I guess, to change your ways and
Well,
not
he
live out
says,
my
yeah,
fate.
he says, I have procured for you a chance. And he says,
Mm.
"Jay, why have you done this?" And we can get to why he may have done that later on because we have a little bit of, I think, of a theory going. We were discussing this yesterday, but anyway, please continue.
Yeah. Scrooge is very, throughout this, very skeptical and tries to dismiss it all. I think you're a big fan of you might be a blob of mustard, a morsel of undigested beef, or
Right, right, right.
whatever. Um, and he tells him he's going to be visited by three ghosts: the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas's future, which duly happens. The ghost of Christmas past takes him back to his school days, back to the end of his relationship with a young woman. We see his sister. We go in the present, we go to Bob Cratchit's house and see how people kind of talk about him when he's not there. Bob Cratchit's wife hates him,
No,
but
his wife, and also then he's also visited. He also sees his nephew Fred,
yes,
who has a dinner
absolutely.
party, and we
Mm,
learn that he's been married, and Scrooge did not particularly
mhm.
want him to marry this woman because she came from a family with, dower. She was dowerless, right? And you see
Well,
almost
and
kind of a
Scrooge sees little. What has marriage ever done for you? What has Christmas ever done for you? He doesn't see what benefit there would be to any of these things, which I think is interesting. Like, there's a link there, right, between Christmas and love, marriage.
yeah,
What's the utility of marriage? What's
sure.
the utility of Christmas? It's a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of
Yeah.
December.
He knows but it's like the old observation that when someone knows the price of everything and the value of nothing,
Mm. Yeah, that's very
kind of
good.
that sort of a
Mm.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Ghost of Christmas Futures, which, and I have to put my hands up here, Vito, and say I've read A Christmas Carol once a
Hmm.
couple of weeks ago, and it was wonderful. But I have seen The Muppet Christmas Carol upwards of 20 times every Christmas for most of my life. And I watched it with my daughters for the first
That's
time this
hilarious.
Christmas, and I was worried. One of my daughters, Paige, she's at the age where she's like recoiling from things on the screen that look scary, and so I was worried about the Ghost of Christmas Future because he's essentially the Grim
Mm,
Reaper.
yeah,
Um, so I was quite relieved when my daughter said, "Why is he just blankets?" Which is essentially what he looks like.
oh, there's I laughed my ass off because in every there's two versions of this movie, which you mentioned. There's a version with Patrick Stewart that you like. I saw that one. When I was
Mm.
growing up, we'd always watch the 1953 version, which was made in the United Kingdom with an actor named Alistair Sim as Scrooge.
Mm.
It's very treacly, it's, as
Okay.
we would say it's schmaltzy. It's like really, it really squeezes you for the tears. I personally like the 1984 version with George C. Scott, who is a well-known American actor. He played Patton famously in a film, and he plays Scrooge, I think, wonderfully. He's one of the only American actors who I think does a convincing British accent, and he's a really gruff, bluff, gruff type of man. He's not. You don't feel sorry for him. He's just he argues with the ghosts when they come, and he's like, got to stand up for your life. Um, and I think when you look through, well, anyway, to finish what happens in the story, right? So what happens? He sees the three ghosts.
Yep.
The last ghost scares him because it shows that he's going to die alone,
Well,
unmourned by
first he
anyone.
shows people talking about him
Right,
after talking about someone who's died, and he's like, "Who
right,
could this be?" And at this point, you're like, "Are you in denial?" Or
yeah,
obviously, it's you. And then yeah, shows him the tombstone that says Ebenezer Scrooge
right. I mean,
on it.
his how what kind of I find funny is that he sees there's a scene of his maid who's taken all his things and is pawning them in the really cheap part of town,
Yeah,
and no one feels bad. And it's funny because it's like in the scene you go, does he not recognize his
his
own
own
maid
drapes and sheets, and
or
yeah,
or this woman? He doesn't know who she is, or he's
mm,
totally in denial about it. He doesn't want
yeah,
to
yeah.
admit it's him. But at the end, he realizes he's died alone, unmourned by anyone, and he has a change of heart. He begs to come back. He wakes up. It's Christmas morning, and then he begins to right the wrongs that he has.
Starting
I don't
with
know.
buying the biggest Christmas turkey and sending it
Right.
to the Cratchit family.
Exactly, because he saw that they're eating some small turkey. What does the ghost say to him? He says it's a very small turkey. That's all Bob Cratchit can afford.
It's a goose initially.
It's a good. Oh
What
yes, right.
Cratchit
It's a goose.
had.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Right.
it's a goose. But yeah, you're right. And yeah, he goes about making amends. He makes the donation to the charitable causes that he didn't
Sure.
donate to at the start of the story.
And that
Unlike in the Muppet Christmas Carol version, though,
they're constantly mocking him with his own words.
yeah,
are there no poor
the
houses? Are
ghosts
there
are.
no?
Yeah,
Yeah, the ghosts are.
yeah.
And
Because he
he's what does
says,
he
yeah,
say?
when he's observing the Cratchits, and he had said before, "Are there no poor houses? Are there no,
Prisons.
I give my money to taxes. This is
Yeah.
when he's watching this, they feed
And
that
it
back to
feels
him.
his argument feels very contemporary. This is the type of
Absolutely, I
argument
pay
we
my
hear,
taxes. Yeah,
but that's something I think you mentioned before, right? So at the end, everyone knows Scrooge has a change of heart, and Bob Cratchit has a sick little boy named Tiny Tim who has, like, I guess it's rickets or something like that.
something's wrong. Yeah.
It's definitely rickets because he has a vitamin deficiency because he's not eating
Mm,
well enough because he
mm.
gets better. He's it's not polio, it's not something like that, because in 1845 you couldn't cure those
But he
illnesses.
wasn't going to get better because the Ghost of Christmas Future, or is it? Yeah, the Ghost of Christmas Future says, well, he dies and it's very sentimental. There's the
Yeah,
his crutch by the fireplace and his little
he's
hat.
preserved at the fireplace, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah. And
Bob Cratchit comes.
Tiny Tim is like the perfect embodiment of good. His gives the Christmas toast.
Yeah, he's
Despite being
innocent.
he's innocent and lovely. He's not a
Yeah,
brat. Right?
he bears up, manfully under
Exactly.
his illness.
Despite
He
being
never
so small.
complains. Yeah,
Yeah. Even we talk about that when Bob Cratchit comes back on Christmas Day, he talks about how Tiny Tim was so great at the church service, and
yeah.
yeah,
I always think the scene is great where Scrooge tells Cratchit, "Don't be late. Get here early on. You've already picked my pocket.
mm,
Not working yesterday. I'm going to pay you anyway. You better be here early the next day." And Bob
better be
shows up
here
late, like almost
10
like
minutes
20
late.
minutes late or something like that.
Hmm.
He says, "Sorry, I was making merry," meaning he's hungover, I guess. And Scrooge says, "That's it. you're going to get it now. And he says, I'm going to raise your salary. And he goes, what? And he
Yeah.
says in the book, he goes, he was about to call the police and have Scrooge committed because he thought he'd lost his mind
Hmm.
completely. He had
Hmm.
such a dramatic change of heart. And he
And they
shows up at his
say,
nephew's house and says, I am sorry I said all those terrible things,
mhm.
and I didn't, I loved my sister and you're her child, and I've wasted so much time. Now I need to try to live so that I can make up for it.
And we learn he goes on to be a second father almost to Tiny Tim,
Yeah.
which the book makes very clear. Tiny Tim lives,
Yeah.
which I read recently is an insert at the printers that
Really?
to clarify that Tiny Tim lives, because they were like, no, we need to really make this clear.
Try
I
to
thought
find
was
at
quite
the end
interesting.
here.
Yeah.
Right. So he did it. It says here Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all. And
Mhm.
infinitely more, which I thought was great. And infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not, in all capitals, did
Did
not
not
die.
die. That's it. Yeah.
He was a second father. And
Yeah.
he was as good a friend, a master, and a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. And he says some people laughed at him. I think that's funny. They leave that out. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let
Yeah.
them laugh.
That's
And he little
interesting.
heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good at which some people did not have their fill of laughter at the outset. Knowing that they would be blind anyway, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins as have the malady in less attractive forms. His own heart laughed, and that was enough for him.
Do you think that's in there, because Dickens has to make it clear that the reversal in character is not because people were talking about him behind his back? So that
Yeah,
even having reversed, people still talk about him behind his back, but who cares because he knows he's doing the
yeah.
right thing.
But now they're talking about him for a different reason. So I think he's
Mhm.
trying to show some people are never going to be satisfied with
Yeah, some people are
whatever you
still
do.
dickheads, guys. That's
Sure, yeah, that's it. So I mean, it's to go back right to the beginning. The first word, the first line, the first sentence says something about Marley
Jacob
being
Marley was
dead.
dead to begin with.
Right,
Mm.
right, and you have to understand that. Yeah, Marley was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that, because if he's not dead, then the
Yeah,
story doesn't make
he's
any sense,
100% a
right?
ghost. Yeah.
Right, he's 100% a ghost. So he stresses that at the beginning because you have to know, have no doubt in your mind that Marley is dead and that his apparition is miraculous. Right?
Hmm.
Scrooge is so far gone that it requires this, right? Is that the whole story you find is that Marley's been dead for 7 years or something like that. Scrooge and him didn't really like each other, as far as I can tell. They were
No,
not friends, they were business partners.
because Scrooge
Scrooge,
wasn't really capable of friendship, perhaps.
right,
And maybe nor was Marley, 'cause he seems to be very similar to Scrooge.
right. I think what I said was that they're almost like alcoholics. Have you ever known old
Mhm.
alcoholics who everyone their drinking is chased everyone else out of their life, and the only people that
Mhm.
they are friends with are other men, usually, that they're getting drunk with at the bar or around at the bar, right? They're not really friends,
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
addicts, and these two men are kind of like that. They're addicts who are addicted to making money.
Money.
They're monomaniacal, they're obsessed, they need to make money at all costs. This is the type
Mhm.
of guys that they are. However, what they're not they're not underhanded. They follow the rules, but they want to be successful. They see something, they realize, or they think that money is all that matters. And for Scrooge, who's a miser, he's a kind of a hoarder of money. He doesn't even enjoy the money he has. Even his nephew Fred says it doesn't do him any good. He doesn't even live well on the money he has. Right? When they say that when Marley died, he wouldn't even close his accounting house early to go see him on his deathbed. He said,
Mm.
"No, no, no, no. I'll go see him when he closes. Let him." They're like, "Well, yeah, we'll try to get him to hang on long enough." He said, yeah, okay. And then when he died, he went. Marley had no one, and Scrooge took all his money and took his house and felt no sympathy about it. Whatever.
Mm.
But yet
Mm.
Marley comes back and says to him, he's laden with chains and heavy cash boxes, which is symbolic of all the his obsession with acquisition. And now he says, "Look," he
And
goes,
ledger
"I'm being
books and
yeah,
yeah.
I'm being punished by being forced to go abroad as my spirit never did while I was alive to see all the people I could have helped. But now I've lost the power to do so. But I want I you know the powers that be in the afterlife have allowed me to come back to warn you." Now my theory is, now I don't think Dickens meant this, but you could say, look, why does Marley do this? What's in it for Marley? Well, maybe Marley thinks to himself, well, I've lost the power to help in the physical world, but Scrooge can still help. If I can convince him to do good while he's still alive, in a way, maybe he's my bridge to the physical world. Through him, I can work, I can do the good works I didn't do while I was alive, and now I've lost the power. So maybe that helps him in some way.
It's either that or that there is more affection than we're, led to believe between the two. But I think you're probably right. Just to pick up on one thing you said there, though, and I'm interested to know what you think of it. You say that he's a miser, Scrooge, but he's not like Fagin in Oliver Twist. He's not
Right.
like at night looking at the gold and the pocket watches and all that, and there's just no sense to this man's richness. There's no. He's not.
Yeah.
He's not got any interesting hobbies. He's not. Trying to buy power and influence. He just works. Then he goes
Yeah.
home to his horrible house, which is underfurnished and cold, and eats
Yeah.
terrible food, and then goes back to work.
I think he's one of these people who have you ever seen the movie uh was it that wonderful movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, There Will Be Blood?
Yep.
You see his character, the oil baron, right? He says in a scene he's getting drunk with this guy who he thinks is his brother. Turns out later he's not. He's only posing as his brother, but they're getting drunk, and he says to his brother, "I have a competition in me. I want no one to succeed but myself." And I think there's something to that in Scrooge's character. He just wants to win. Like he thinks of it as, I think he just, when he goes and he does business, he wants to get the best deal. He doesn't see that as instrumental to something else. That's the end in itself for him. And I think the entire story is showing him that, look, you can do a lot of good with this. Like, I don't think it's condemning him for being a good businessman. I think it's the condemnation in the story is about him doing nothing good with his money, right?
Yes, I agree. I agree, and I think that there's. Um, I think Dickens is keen to tell us that bad things can happen to you, and you can become a cruel, cold, detached, bitter man as a result.
Yeah.
So
I
his
think it's
school
a complex.
days.
Yeah, well that's what it is. It's a complex character, right? You see that his
Mm,
father was very cruel and cold to him. His
mhm,
father held
yep.
his mother died in childbirth while giving birth to him, and his father never forgave him for that. Kept him at boarding schools, wouldn't allow him to come home during the holidays. So he didn't have a very happy
And
childhood.
it stops him loving a woman, which you kind of sense as the real fork in the road when
Yeah,
which the Ghost of Christmas Past shows him when he could have been loved by this woman and love her in return
sure.
and have
Yeah,
a warmer heart. And do we see, is it the Ghost of Christmas Present? We see her with another man and children.
yeah. And the man says, he says to her, I saw Scrooge in the city, and he was just
Mm,
sitting in his counting house in front of a little candle by himself. And
yeah.
she says, wretched man. She feels pity for him.
Yeah, she does.
He's surrounded
Yeah.
by children. She has a husband who loves her now, and he's alone with
Yeah.
his money. But you see
Yeah.
before her saying to him, "Look, I'm poor. I don't come with a uh." Well, she says dowerless. I guess that means she doesn't. That was the old tradition of the wife's family paying money to the
Mm,
groom or something like that. Her
yeah.
family's not rich, and
No. And
she
and she
says,
says, I can see you care only about that now. You've become single minded in
"Yeah."
your kind of accumulation of wealth.
And he says something interesting, doesn't he? He says something along the lines of like, "There's he defends um his preoccupation with it by saying something along the lines of, I don't know what the exact line is, but it's like, you know, money money puts distance between you and hardship. He
Right.
justifies it in a really, in a way that
Yeah.
makes sense. Money, even today, money makes it so you don't have to experience a lot of unpleasant things.
True, but he
Um,
still does. That's the thing. That's why I just don't think
yeah,
that's what
but that's how
drives him,
he
you know?
justifies it. But
Yeah,
he still
exactly.
treats
But that's what it
himself
is. It's
badly.
justification. Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's why I think it's the cruelty. It's the cold heart. It's I think that's what Dickens is warning us about. It's not. He could have told us a story, which is we could have had if you've ever seen this is a strange comparison. But if you've ever seen About a Boy, the Hugh Grant film based on
yeah,
the Nick Hornby novel, actually About a Boy, where they
hmm
show him at Christmas and he's just kind of surrounded by all the latest gadgets and all the best food and all the best drink, but ultimately he's alone, and that's sad. We could have
right.
seen that, but we're not. We don't see that. We see a
Right. And
cold.
of course, Scrooge is shown all of these people. He says something about warmth and depth of feeling. Show me warmth and
Yeah.
depth of feeling. And he is, and he sees people who have much less than him, but they
Mm,
have companionship, they have family, they have love. They have people
yes.
willing to struggle with them in life, and he has no one.
And perhaps this is a useful way to segue to the road to Wigan Pier, because in the glimpse into the Christmas dinner of the Cratchits, we see what you sense would make Orwell recoil, which is the idealizing of the working class family, right? Although, and we can talk
Right.
about this later, Bob Cratchit isn't really working class, but the big family around the table, the goose is terrible, like everything's terrible. But they say, I've never seen a better goose. I've never seen what is it? What, I can't
Yeah.
remember his exact lines. Like, never was it there a goose so perfect, to his
Yeah.
wife.
And
Um,
his wife makes a pudding, and oh, it's the most perfect
it's the
pudding,
best
and
pudding, but Dickens
the best
makes it clear
round
this
of
is a turtle.
punch. And
Yeah, it's bad.
it's so treacly, it's almost nauseating.
Exactly.
Like they're
Yeah,
so
which is very
happy.
Dickens, right? There's very which is
Yeah,
like Tiny Tim is very kind of sentimental,
yeah.
very like
Oh,
yeah, and I you sense Orwell would recoil from that. And in his
right.
observations of poor family life, it's not that he says they're broken homes or anything like that, but equally there's none of this. Oh,
Well,
it doesn't matter that we don't have all the things other people have. We're still having as good a time as anyone else.
yeah, they wouldn't say that. I mean, I think he talks about the family who runs the boarding house he stays in. I believe he goes
Mm.
to the in Road to Wigan Pier. He goes to this town in northern England, right in the coal country, the Black Country.
It's not the
Um,
Black Country. The Black Country is in the Midlands.
oh, I'm
Um,
sorry. Okay.
yeah, no, I just pull my English geography here. So Wigan is it's now basically part of Manchester. Manchester's kind of swallowed up,
There we
but
go.
it's Lancashire. Um,
That's
it's
right, Lancashire.
northwest. Yeah.
Yeah, and he goes to this house and he forces himself, because you sense that Orwell himself is a kind of a is kind of an elitist, and he
Mm,
has this natural revulsion towards the poor. So to try and overcome his revulsion of the poor, he goes and forces himself to spend time, amongst them. And he finds this boarding house run by a husband and wife called the Brookins, Mr. Brookins and Mrs. Brookins. And it's horrible. It's a
in
really
a
terrible
and they,
place.
it's a tripe above a tripe shop. Is it? They have the boarding house and tripe.
They run a tripe shop in the bottom floor, and no one goes
And
there.
this, if you, I don't know if you know what tripe is, Vito, but
Oh, I
I'm
know what tripe
sure
is.
if people read this book in America, it's doing nothing for stereotypes about English food.
No,
Oh,
Italians eat tripe too. I don't understand why.
really?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
wow, that's really surprising. Yeah, I've
Um,
never. I just want to be clear. I've never eaten tripe. We've moved on
yeah,
since then.
no,
Yeah.
don't do that. It's no good. Yeah, but the tripe is this disgusting food, and the shop is filthy, and there are flies everywhere, dead flowers. It's just not taken care of. So he doesn't show that they're particularly cleanly, right? They could make the effort and clean the shop up. They don't. They
Mhm.
could be so. No one wants to eat old tripe in a dirty shop. And above it, they run a boarding house where there are like beds just crammed into this one room, and like six guys sleep, you know, head to foot on these beds, just smoking in there constantly, and it smells horrible and it's disgusting. Mr.
Mm.
Brookins is gross. His hand is always filthy and he's touching the food with it.
Oh,
Mrs. Brookins is described as what does he say?
she
There's this
just sits
great,
there, doesn't she? Sits on a.
and she says the same thing over and over. It's something like,
Mm,
"Oh, that seems odd now, don't it?" And she says
yes.
that over and over and over again. And he said it was like listening to a phantom, you know, like a ghost trapped in some sort of a netherworld, just walking around in a circle, doing and saying the same things over and over again. Finally, he loses it and just leaves. He's like, I can't
Yeah,
take this anymore.
and
So he doesn't.
there's no like, everyone's got a place at our table kind of thing. Everyone in that boarding house is there because they can pay,
Yeah.
and they deeply resent the old people who are there to like just eke out their what little they have in terms of savings or a pension.
Yep.
They deeply resent their being there because
Yeah.
they're like not paying as much as they could be, or um,
Right.
you know, you know,
So it's very
not
funny.
very. It's not very Christmas cheery.
He doesn't sentimentalize them. He shows them
Not
as
at
they
all.
are. And I think that's a
And a lot
very
of people are
important
angry
thing.
about that, right? Because I think, to your point of the cleanliness, if you read a lot of the criticisms of this book and of Orwell in particular, he's very open. It's all about the class prejudice, and I wonder how that hits American ears, Vito. I think for me, actually, even it was strange because we don't talk about class like that anymore. Maybe we didn't then either, and it was quite shocking to have a man just lay it out very clearly. And he even says, "I can live amongst these people forever. I can champion their cause. But I will always be middle class, and that will always separate me from the working class, always." And he
Yeah, and
said, which I
that's
think a lot of
okay.
people, well, yeah, he says, which I think a lot of people take offense to even now. He says the problem is they smell, and that's what middle class people will say. And he never says they're wrong. He says they do because they work really hard and they um, don't have the often don't have a bathroom in the house and all these kinds of things, and they don't have as much time as you and I, so they're not going to go out and bathe like every other day or whatever it
Yeah.
was back then. And it really reminded me actually of I remember when I was studying your revolutionary period, you would call it. I
Hmm.
would obviously call it the period of rebellion. When Thomas Jefferson, in his notes on Virginia, which were these notes he sent back to his highfalutin friends in Paris, they were like, "Oh, what's it like? In these colonies, what's it like?" And he talked about the slaves, the black people, and he talked about how um, they smell and they sleep all the time, and he lacked the self awareness that Orwell has because he lacked that knowledge that, well, of course they're sleeping all the time. You're working them in the hot Virginia sun, like
Right.
12 hours a day, and you give them 5 minutes. Of course they're going to go to sleep. You know what I mean? Um, so yeah,
Well,
bit of a tangent there.
there's just this wonderfully evocative scene in Road to Wigan Pier where he's on a train leaving there, and he's describing
Yes.
the dreariness and the horrible cold and the smoke and the ash and all this,
Mm,
and he sees this woman out of the window of the train standing in the backyard, like unplugging like a drain that comes from the sink, trying to get like food out of it with like a
mm,
a huge pipe cleaner or something like that,
yeah.
and her hands are just chapped with cold, and she just looks sad and desolate. And
Mhm.
he says, you can't think that these people don't know what's happening to them. They're just human beings too. I think
I
that's
was
what.
That's it. I was literally about to say the same thing because that
Yeah.
moment, and it really chimed with me, because you think, in the way that you move into a bigger house, right, or you get a nicer car or whatever, and you appreciate it probably for the first couple of weeks, and then that becomes the normal, that becomes the baseline. And I think we
Yeah.
all maybe tell ourselves when you see like a starving African child or something, you think, well, it's obviously sad, but that's what they're used to. Maybe you tell yourself that to make yourself feel better or something. And I think that's what he's attacking. He's saying, no, it's terrible. It's terrible for them every day, and they know that. And I think that's maybe the why Orwell would cringe at the, oh okay, the goose is terrible. Oh okay, Tiny Tim is sick. But we this is what we know, and we're still happy.
Yeah. I always like the when the ghost of Christmas passed. shows Scrooge his life as a young apprentice
Mm.
to this
Fezziwig.
cloth merchant named Old. He calls him Old Fezziwig. It was his
Not
boss. He was a
Fozziwig, as he is in the Muppets.
Fezziwig. Dickens has these just wonderful names,
Oh,
right?
so good.
People,
Yeah.
they sound like they are Scrooge.
Mm.
It sounds like you're
Oh, yeah.
guy like squeezing the last, trying to squeeze some penny or
Yeah.
something. Scrooge is like a sound he
Well, I
makes.
would
Fezziwig,
evidenced by the fact that it's become, an adjective now, right? Like, "Oh, he's such a Scrooge."
yeah, it's just wonderful. And Fezziwig, it sounds like it's just a kind of a frivolous and happy man, But he says Fezziwig provided them a Christmas party every year and was full of
Mhm.
life and happiness, and and the ghost refutes Scrooge by saying, "Look, who is this guy? What did he give anybody? He wasted money. What's the use of Christmas?" And Scrooge says, "Yeah,
Mm.
but the happiness he gave to everyone, it only cost a few pounds, and
Mhm.
with the happiness we got out of it, it was like as if it were worth $1 million, right?"
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and he realizes he's refuted himself, his own
Yeah.
argument. He said, "Oh shit, I forgot." But it also says in one of the versions, I don't know if it's in the book, but in the 1953 movie version, there's a later scene where Fezziwig is essentially being forced out of business by basically what amounts to new technologies. Um,
I don't remember this.
and he says something along the lines of, "No, I'm not going to sell out to the bigger company. I ran this business for all these years to achieve a certain end. I wanted to employ people. I wanted to provide a good life for people. And if I sell out to the larger conglomerate, I'm not going to be able to do that anymore." And he says something like, it's not for profit alone that a man spends his life building a business."
Mm.
And he said, I'll have to be forced out of business, with the old ways if that's what's necessary. And that shows that he goes out of business. And Scrooge jumps ship from Fezziwig and goes to takes a job with the guy who's
Yeah.
forcing Fezziwig out of business.
Mm.
And you look at that and you go, well, of course, Fezziwig's an old man. Maybe he can afford to retire. Scrooge is a younger man. He's going to take a job with whatever's next, whatever's up and coming. And I think you made a good point. We were discussing this, kind of doing our little groundwork for the podcast. Is that, well, I mean, in economic terms, right? Purely economic terms, Scrooge is not. He's not a bad man, right? He doesn't. He's kind of he's a practical, no nonsense, kind of bullshit averse guy
Yep.
in all aspects of his life. He doesn't underpay Bob Cratchit. We actually saw
No,
an
and
article
again,
about this.
these are the choices Dickens has made, right? Like, so
Yeah,
he could be running a poor house. He could be,
yeah,
I mean, maybe he wouldn't have the same resonance as now, but he could be like factory farming or whatever.
yeah.
He's not engaged in. It's kind of vague what he does, but Dickens could have gone really hard on him being like a real vulture capitalist kind.
I mean, he kind of is. I mean, there is one scene where there are some guys that are trying to buy, like,
I
I
think
guess he
he
like,
wants to evict them. Yeah.
well, no, I think he tries to, like, he's kind of cornered the market on corn or something like
Oh yeah.
that, and he's driving the price up. There's no place else they can go. He's got a warehouse full of corn, and they're like, "We want to buy corn. We're trying to give it to poor people or something like that for our charity." And he goes, "Yeah, I'll sell you the corn, but you got to buy it at this rate right now." They're like, "Well, you told us a lower price yesterday." He said, "Yep, now it
Oh
went
yeah.
up, and if you wait till
Isn't that
tomorrow, it'll go
something?
up
Isn't there
again."
something about him evicting some tenants, or am I getting that from the Muppets?
Maybe that's from the Muppets. He
Maybe it's from
doesn't.
the
I don't think
Muppets.
he evicts anybody. He and as far as we know, like I said before, he pays Cratchit a fair
Hmm.
wage. The
Yeah, I
problem
don't
is
know.
that
So I
Cratchit
think
has a
that.
lot of children, and he can't really afford how many. He has like 7 or 8 children, and he doesn't have really enough money to support all those kids. And there's one
Hmm.
scene where he finds out that his nephew Fred is going to hire one of Cratchit's younger sons to work for him,
Hmm.
and he
Hmm.
says, "Fred's paying him how much? for a kid that
Mm,
young? How could he pay him that much money?
mm.
Because he's trying to make me look bad.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because so the road to Wigan Pier, one of the harder things to get through as a 2024 man is all the budget details he gives you. You know, he's like, a family has this many shillings and they spend this much on it. And it's all just, it goes right over your head. We've
Yeah.
decimalized it's pence and pounds and that's it. And similarly, so I guess because I think saw the same economic analysis that Bob Cratchit was paid pretty well.
Yeah.
Um,
For an
do you
1845
think
financial
yeah, do you
clerk,
think
he
the
didn't
idea is
make
that
bad
people
money.
reading it in the time would have recognized that he
Yeah,
wasn't
I
being
think
paid
that
yet?
was the point, as we discussed. I
Mm,
think that was the point that Dickens was trying to make. It wasn't that Cratchit was underpaid. He was
mm,
making the going wage for a person doing that job.
mm.
I mean, Scrooge Scrooge treated Cratchit the way he treated himself. So when he
Right.
doesn't want he won't allow Cratchit to put more coal in the coal scuttle. It's because he denies himself the
He
coal
ties
from the
himself
coal
down. Yeah, it's
scuttle
not like
too.
he's shoveling it in, is it?
Right. It's not like he's off in like a like in his office and it's all warm and nicely lit and everything. He's sitting in a cold office too with one candle, freezing, and he won't allow himself to get warm. So it's not like he's treating Cratchit worse than he treats himself. It's that Cratchit's unfortunate to work for for a guy like him. Um, but what was the thing? So what we're saying is right, what you said too, which I thought was very insightful, was that Dickens is saying it's not enough to just do the bare
What's
minimum.
expected of you? Yeah, pay your
Right.
taxes, pay a fair
Right.
wage to Bob Cratchit.
Right. Because he says to the men seeking some money for their charity, well, the poor they have no resort. And he says, yeah, well, there's poorhouses, there are prisons, my taxes go to pay for them, that's enough.
Hmm.
He says, but some
Yep.
people can't go there and many would rather die. Well, then they should die and reduce the surplus
Reduce
population.
the surplus population. Another line repeated back to him by the
The
Ghost of
ghost of
Christmas Present,
present, I
maybe?
believe.
Yep.
Yeah, the ghost of Christmas future doesn't say anything. He just shows him
Doesn't- He
differently.
just blankets, Vito.
Yeah, blankets. Yeah, but he says to him, Ghost of Christmas Present said, maybe you should learn something about the surplus population. He says maybe
Mm,
in the eyes of God, you are more worthless and unfit to live than this poor man's child.
yeah,
Right? I think we
yeah.
kind of lost that in a way. We
Mm,
would have talked about that. Why should Scrooge feel bad?
mm.
But
Because
doing just the
one of the criticisms of Dickens is that he did, as much as anyone, maybe more than anyone, to bring to the fore the plight of the urban poor
yeah.
in Victorian Britain. This world leading, many parallels with it with America now, right? World leading power, all
Hmm.
this money, yet this incredibly poor kind of underclass.
I believe he visited the Five Points in New York City too at the time, right? In the
So he
1840s and
famously
50s.
hated America.
Oh yeah.
Because mostly because they were ripping him off, I think.
They were
They were just
publishing his
reprinting his
books without
stuff.
paying him
Yeah,
royalties.
exactly. Yeah. Very Scrooge-like of him to be
Yeah,
upset
yeah,
about that.
yeah.
But yeah. So he, yeah, as you say, I think he is saying the solution isn't that the end of the story isn't that the government passes a law that makes Scrooge pay more tax and or
Right.
raise the minimum wage or anything like that. It's that he looks to his own sort of personal story, and I think that's very important, right? It's his personal story, his past, the people connected to him, present, the future that he will face. Think about the kind of man he wants to be and change his ways. He's not being
Yeah.
compelled; he has to arrive at
Right.
that himself.
He's looking at the man in the mirror. Right. That's that Michael Jackson.
Exactly. Yeah, he's asking him to change his ways.
Right. No, you know what? And it's funny because you also mentioned this idea that this is a very conservative story
Mm,
because the idea is that Scrooge should feel responsible for the people in his life. His
right.
crime is not that he isn't paying his taxes or he's a or
He's not
or
sending
he's
money to the Sudan or.
Right, he's
But
not sending money
yeah.
to the Sudan, and then he's screwing people in business deals. He's really not.
Mm.
He's just he's doing the right thing for himself. The thing is, it's him personally. It's
Yeah.
his soul, so to speak, that's rotten. Right?
Mm.
He doesn't do the right things with his money. He's almost like, he even points out in the book, I believe, when they're saying he's kind of being chastised by being shown how people look at him. They say, well, look, he goes, I have all this money because I'm a good businessman.
Yeah.
If I was poor, I couldn't do any good at all. And then they say, yeah,
Mm.
but you're
Right.
not doing any good.
You're literally
Nobody's
not doing
saying
anything. Yeah.
he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
not being condemned for being a close dealer. He was being condemned for not doing anything with his money that
Yes.
was good. And especially for, I mean, yes, he gives money to charity when he changes his ways, but he also brings his family back into his own life, and he takes responsibility for Bob Cratchit.
Mm. And it's about that, right? It's about, I think it's about what you transmit
Yeah.
and what you do with the people close to you. So, as you say, that the Ghost of Christmas Present shows him Bob Cratchit's life and Fred's life.
Yeah.
Doesn't show him some random slum that he could
Well,
invest in. Right?
they do in one scene. They show a
Do they?
man living under a bridge with his family, and he says something like, "I want to work, but there's no jobs. Why the hell? Why can't I work? I want to support my
Okay.
family. I'm not lazy." In other words, Dickens is trying to show it's not that they're lazy; it's that
Right.
no one will hire this guy, and he's living
Mm.
under a bridge with his family, freezing.
That's very Orwell, isn't it? The dispelling of
Yeah,
the
the myth.
lies the middle class tell themselves to
Yeah,
feel
and then
better.
the ghost actually does something we always used to make fun of, but he says like, "Look upon this," and he like opens up his robe, and there are two children underneath. Two
Ignorance and
emaciated children, right?
what are their names? Want
Ignorance,
and
and
ignorance.
want.
Mm.
Upon their head
Yeah.
is written doom. But I always used to say
Mm.
like, "Look upon this," and he's just not wearing any underwear.
These are my balls. Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, I think I mentioned to you, I listened to the Rest is History did a, I guess, historical account of this, and they mentioned that
yeah.
Lenin had gone to see a stage adaptation of A Christmas Carol and was so disgusted by its bourgeois values that he walked out halfway through.
Oh, sure. Because why would Lenin? Why would someone like Lenin like that? Because what he's would have looked at is to say, what you're saying the answer to the problem is to convince rich people that they have a
Right.
responsibility towards poorer
Yeah.
people. In reality, the poor should be rising up, killing him, and
Exactly.
taking
Bob Cratchit
taking
should
his
be like throttling him in the night and
yeah, yeah.
taking his stuff. Yeah, not as good a story, I think
Well,
somehow.
because it's about power, right? And what he's
Yeah,
talking about is a transformation of conscience, which I think is which is why the story is still
right.
being told today. Um,
So interested in what you think about. So in Road to Wigan Pier, what you talked about the boarding house and various other personal experiences that Orwell has amongst, and he clearly makes a massive effort to like live amongst these people and understand what their lives are like.
oh yeah. What he
But then the
describes,
second
I mean,
half,
there's one section in there where he describes what a coal miner has to do just to
oh
get
my
to
gosh,
work in the morning.
yeah,
Has to
underground,
walk
the traveling
hunched
underground.
over for like half
Mm,
a mile before he even gets to
yeah.
the area. And he's like, and they don't even pay him for
Till
the
they get
time
to
where
the
he's
coal face.
getting, yeah, till they get to the place. So
Mm,
he's spending like an hour and
insane.
a half just walking through a low tunnel just to get to the work site.
That sounds horrific.
Yeah,
Um,
horrible.
and then, but then the second half is his kind of. To be honest, I was quite disappointed in it. I've always idolized maybe Orwell's mind, and there's some great insight in there. There's some amazing
Yeah.
stuff in there, but it's kind of the ramblings of a. It doesn't seem very structured. Um, he talks about a lot of great. Orwell's never better, obviously, as we know from Animal Farm and 1984. He's kind of never, as a lefty himself, he's never better than when he's skewering the left.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and he talks about like the socialists who are in like the hiking boots or whatever and badly dressed and who would want to
Oh,
associate with them.
he talks about champagne socialists. Like
Yeah,
he can't stand
cannot
these
stand
guys.
them. And yeah, and the way they
Yeah.
act and the way they look and the way they talk and all this stuff, it's brilliant. Um,
Yeah.
but interestingly, I think the thing that's a bit hard to understand, and you have to appreciate this guy's talking in the 30s, and we know better now, right? But he's kind of saying there's obviously just two options: socialism and fascism,
Yeah.
the future. And so I say, let's go for socialism. And I think I'm interested to know how you took it, because I was hoping to see, okay, well, what is socialism to Orwell? What's it fleshed out? How does it look in comparison to the A Christmas Carol, where it's people exercising their individual
Yeah.
agency to better themselves? And I feel like he doesn't really do that. What do you think?
I don't think he. I think Orwell had a very strong moral sense. I see him as more of a moralist than a theorist. He's
Hmm.
not.
Yeah, that's fair.
He's saying. I think he's saying that socialism is the only thing he can conceive of that would be morally defensible. But he doesn't. I don't think he thinks it would work. Like I think he doesn't see any other choice. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't see. He sees capitalism.
As
And let's be
failed.
honest. I mean, well, yes, he sees capitalism as failed. And in a sense, I do understand where he comes from, right?
Hmm.
Capitalism, you have to believe in a couple of myths, if you're a capitalist. And one of those myths is that all people within the capitalist system are freely entering into contracts, right? And obviously that's not true because people are
His
driven
miners
by
are certainly
need.
not doing well. They're
Sure, and
compelled. Yeah.
people are compelled by need. You
Mm.
have something, I need it, I'm forced to enter into contract with you basically on your terms unless I have a choice. If you're in a position like people like you and I, maybe we're a little later on, we're kind of mid-career, so maybe we have choices when we go and
Mhm.
negotiate with a new employer. But, we're still subject to whatever the next guy is willing to work for, right? If the
Sure.
guy has the same qualifications, he's willing to work for less, then that guy will get the job if I refuse that money, right?
Mhm.
So I do think that is kind of a myth, and I think people realize that there is compulsion in
So what's the second
capitalism.
myth?
What's that?
You said there were two myths, I
Did I
think.
say that? Oh, I
Or
said, well,
maybe yeah.
one of the myths is that is
That's
that
one.
there's
Yeah.
is that
Yeah.
everything is entered into freely.
Yeah.
So Orwell would say, look, people aren't people aren't freely, entering. Like he would say, look at the coal miners. The
Mm.
coal miners to do the job have to undergo this horrendous ritual of walking hunched over for a half a mile, three-quarters of a mile under the ground in this horrible
Mm.
unventilated tunnel. You know, and to say that those people have freely chosen to do that job, but they don't have any other choice. They have to live, right?
Yeah.
And the other myth I think would be that the poor are intrinsically virtuous, which he says that they're
Yeah.
not, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's the one thing that you would say he's best when skewering the left, because the left tends to say, right, let's say the right, roughly speaking, would say everything's great with capitalism. It raises people out of poverty, but and they're free to go in and out. There are contracts. There's no compulsion. They're freely entering into a contract. Well, not necessarily. And at the same time, the left would say the poor are virtuous. They're being victimized by the capitalist, by the greedy capitalist. But that's not necessarily true either, right? I don't think, but Orwell doesn't see anything. He doesn't see any other option morally. He can't
Mm.
accept capitalism because I
Mm.
think because he thinks that he sees capitalists, and capitalists are almost grotesque. They're too
Mm.
they're too satisfied. They
Mm.
start to tell themselves stories. Oh well, those people over there who are poor, they're just poor because
And I
they're
guess
lazy, or they
that's the
haven't
point,
been.
right? That's kind of the point of A Road to Wigan is to skewer a lot of those stories.
Yeah, and that's the
You know,
point. And I think
which is
that's
why
the
I mean the
same.
whole thing is about the unemployment actually, rather than
Yeah,
like to your
that's
point of
that's
like,
exactly it.
yes, the mines are terrible, but his main focus is when there's no work available. That's when they're at the most miserable. So yeah, as you say, the idea that they're
Yeah.
lazy. Look at what they'll do, and they prefer that to doing nothing.
And Dickens would say the same thing. I think he would say,
Mm.
"Look, you're people want to work." He shows the people, the guy, I want to work. These are good hands. I've done hard work. Why can't I get a job?
No.
Um,
So
it's
maybe
the same type of
we
thing.
should. Sorry, Vito, go ahead.
No, no, please.
Well, I was saying maybe we should just close it off on A Christmas Carol of one thing I don't think I appreciated until I read this book and then just started to read a few things about it, is the extent to which Dickens has contributed to our perception of Christmas,
Yeah,
which I was initially quite skeptical of, but it certainly seems like it's a Victorian invention. not that it wasn't. Obviously, it was always here in some form. Not always, but for a period. But even it being a day off and all a lot of the imagery, the coziness, the Christmas carols, the it's dark and cold and windswept outside, but you're inside with a cozy fire, and the Christmas cheer is all essentially from this book more than
Yeah.
anywhere else. I don't think I quite appreciated that. I don't know if you did.
I don't think I did either. I mean, I know back before maybe the turn of the 20th century, Christmas
Mm,
was not an official holiday in most places.
yeah.
I've always felt personally, I don't know if you have felt this, but I've always felt that Christmas, a lot of people say this, that they don't feel that Christmas is a happy holiday. I don't feel
Mm.
that. I think that after you pass a certain age, it it really is, to use uh, the concepts from A Christmas Carol. It's more of a time for ghosts. You have people,
Yeah.
your relatives from your childhood. Many of the older
Mhm.
ones are dead now, and you sort of think. I do. I think a lot about those times. They're kind of ghosts of Christmas past more than I really think about the joy in the present.
There is a haunting element to Christmas.
Yeah, that's it.
It's magical, but it's. I mean, if you think about some of the songs, "Silent Night," for example, was my grandmother's favorite song. So I remember like when we were 7 years old, before the opening of the presents. My grandmother was Hungarian, so we
Wow.
did
Yeah.
the Christmas present opening on Christmas Eve. But beforehand, we would always, I'd play the recorder or something, and my brother would sing, or some what
Yeah.
was must have been horrible to watch reflection of that. And we would sing Silent Night, which it's like Silent Night, Holy, the song,
Yeah. Of course.
and it reminded my gran of her mum, and she would always cry.
Yeah.
And it's a haunting. I don't think it's just because of those associations. I think it's objectively a haunting tune. You think about a lot of Christmas carols; they're not all merry. A lot of them are
Oh.
quite haunting, quite
Oh,
evocative
yeah,
of
I think
loss.
they're very,
Yeah.
yeah, they're not happy.
No.
There's for example, my favorite Christmas song is "I'll Be Home for Christmas." I
Hmm.
believe this came about in the war, right? It's this idea
Right.
that um, I'll be home. Is it? Oh no, I'm sorry. It's "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas,"
That's
where he
quite
says
haunting.
it's very sad. Have yourself a merry little Christmas.
Let the
From now
Yule.
on, from now on, our troubles will be far away. Here we are as in olden days, happy golden days of yore. It goes on, and then through the years, we all will be together if the fates allow.
Hmm.
And I think that song came about in the post-war period or during World War II, where people had this sense that, hey, nothing is guaranteed. People
Exactly.
knew people who had died; they hadn't come back from the war. The world had just gone completely insane. The so-called midnight of the century.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people had this,
And
I think they had this sense that they were lucky for whatever time they got. And it wasn't happy. It was
no.
just,
But
but
it also is happy, and I think it's almost like there's that's the Dickensian thing, I think, that has influenced like what I consider to be quite the meaningful Christmas is you don't actually get the light without the dark, and you don't get the warmth without the
yeah,
cold, and that's the point, that we are moving through this life and we've lost people and we will lose people, but you'll always have this, and I think that's why people get very emotional about to your point about the war, being home for Christmas, being because
yeah,
that moment, no matter what happens to you, will be preserved in amber for the rest of your life. Because every Christmas, you'll start hearing those songs and seeing that tree, and you'll think of that Christmas you had that person
yeah.
for.
That's what everybody has, like, say, a movie that they see. There's a movie called The Christmas Story about a boy who wants a BB gun.
Okay, this is
And
new
it's a
to
very
me.
famous it's a very famous movie in the United States. It was written by
Of course, it's
this
about a gun. You people and your guns.
well, no, I mean it's set in like 1930 in the book. In the
Okay.
movie, it's set the movie was made in 1983, and it's supposed to be in 1939. And it's a little boy who really wants this. this BB gun for Christmas, and everybody is conspiring to stop it. Everyone from his mother to the teacher in school, everyone says you'll shoot your eye out. It's a BB gun, and he goes through this whole thing. He has all these different plots he hatches to try and get one of these guns. And they did a kind of a good remake for people who grew up around my age called 8-Bit Christmas,
Okay.
which I think it's basically a remake of that movie with Neil Patrick Harris, and it's about a boy in 1988 who really wants a Nintendo. And his parents are going, no,
Great.
video games are bad for kids. You can't have that. And you should go outside and play and read books. Don't play video games. And it's almost the same story.
Hmm.
But that movie from 1983, it's just become so, it's become like you have to watch it because it brings back, not because the movie is good, but because it
Hmm.
brings back memories of watching it every
Right.
Christmas as a
Yeah.
kid. And
Nostalgia is a
um,
big part of
yeah.
Christmas. Yeah.
Yeah, but what does
Yeah.
nostalgia mean? Nostalgia literally means something like the reopening of an old wound,
Right.
which is what it
Right.
is, right?
I think it's a lot like, why a lot of sort of grown men enjoy Superman movies, Spider-Man movies, Star Wars
Yeah,
movies, myself included. And I remember, Kevin Smith, the guy who wrote a lot of that's Clerks with Ben Affleck and
yeah.
Chasing
From
Amy. And,
Red Bank, New Jersey, a
right,
couple
right, yeah,
miles away from
one of
me.
your
Yeah,
own. Yeah, and
yeah,
I always remember when I used to listen to some of his film reviews, and he would always the highest compliment from him was, "Oh, I loved the new Spider-Man movie, whatever. It made me feel like a kid again." And I
yeah,
think there's something about, and as I go through Christmas now with my children, there is something about that magic that you're able to recapture um, in Christmas sometimes as an adult, and does sometimes feel like you're just capturing glimpses of how you felt when you were six, you know.
yeah,
Um, and I think that's why the emotional core of A Christmas Carol is Tiny Tim.
yeah. That's very insightful. Yeah, you're right,
You know?
because he believes he believes in it. And I think that's what the story truly is that Scrooge has to kind of almost go back to the point where he can be made to believe too,
Yeah.
because he's such a rationalist. I said
Mm.
to you, I kind of like him for that. He's a hard boiled
Yeah.
rationalist. Why should I spend money on this? What's the good of that? He
Yep.
sees everything as dollars and cents, and there's something appealing about that. I like that no nonsense character about him, but also he misses the fact that most of the things that matter most are not rational, and he has to be made to see that those things are
Right.
the kind of romantic
Yeah.
core of life, that there is magic in life. And if there
Yes.
isn't magic and you don't recognize the magic, it can lead you to be cruel and unfeeling.
It's not December 25th, as he says.
Yeah.
He says the poor reason to pick a man's pocket every December. It's Christmas. It's not December
Yeah.
25th. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
Um,
a good way to leave off. It isn't December 25th, it's Christmas. Yeah.
mhm. So Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yes. Merry Christmas, everyone. Cheers, man.
Cheers. Oh, I finished my
Wonderful to
beer.
talk to you. And
You too.
all right.
Take
Have a
care.
great
Have a lovely
Christmas.
Christmas.
To everyone listening, Merry Christmas to you, or Happy Christmas, as you would say. The Light Brigade podcast, signing off.